Hi, everyone. Good to see you again. I'm Anne Marie Green. President Trump says he is postponing the State of the Union address until the partial government shutdown ends. This after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi wrote a letter to the president withdrawing her invitation for him to give the address on the House floor. The president slammed the House Speaker on Twitter last night, calling the move her prerogative. He then went on to say there is no venue that can compete with the history, tradition, and importance of the House chamber. I look forward to giving a great State of the Union address in the near future. Speaker Pelosi responded, Mr. President, I hope by saying near future, you mean you will support the House passed package to end the shutdown. She's referring to one of two competing measures the Senate will vote on today, 34 days after the shutdown began. A Republican bill would give the president his $5.7 billion in border wall funding, while a Democratic proposal would reopen the government through February 8th, but with no wall money. Both bills are likely to fail. Nancy Cordes joins us now from Capitol Hill alongside Major Garrett, who is at the White House. So, Nancy, I'm going to start with you. Can you give us a little bit of context here? Just, does there have to be a State of the Union address? And has a president ever been refused access to the House chamber?
There doesn't have to be an address in person, televised, as there has been for decades. The president is simply required by the Constitution to inform the Congress from time to time about the state of the union. In this case, he really doesn't have the option of delivering that State of the Union right now, because in order for any president to deliver an address to a joint session of Congress, the House and Senate have to pass a resolution that sets out the date and the time. And in this case, the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, surprised a lot of people, including some members of her own party, when she basically put her foot down yesterday in that letter to the president and said, no, the House will not be voting on that resolution until the government is reopened. And so initially the president was saying that he might deliver the speech in another location, but in a somewhat conciliatory note this morning, he said that, in fact, he will wait until after the government is open. So clearly this is a fight that he and the White House decided they didn't want to have.
Yeah, indeed. So, Major, we're not going to hear the State of the Union address, but we did hear earlier this week that the White House had been working on two different scripts, two different speeches, I guess. One that would have been delivered in the House chamber, and then maybe another one that could have been delivered at a political rally. Do you think there's a likelihood that though we won't hear the State of the Union address, we may hear from the president addressing the nation in some other way?
Well, there's going to be a State of the Union address. It's just not going to be January 29th,
right,
the original scheduled date. The president has said, once this is resolved, I'll come to the House chamber, you'll welcome me, and we'll go through the process. It's just not going to happen on the 29th. So the president last night did something that I think sends a couple of interesting signals. One, he respected the institutional prerogative of the House. Why does that matter? Because institutional prerogatives are the way our government functions, when it functions best. Does this mean the shutdown is closer to ending? I'm not going to predict that, but this is a significant concession by the White House and a recognition that institutional powers and institutional prerogatives matter. And if you're going to take that approach, which the White House was not taking until last night on this particular matter, it doesn't require a great leap to say the institutional prerogatives and other matters also are important to recognize as well. And what are those institutional prerogatives in terms of resolving this partial government shutdown? Well, that the House Democratic majority has within its power the ability to bring legislation to the floor or not. And that institutional power has to be recognized. Recognizing one might mean this White House is getting closer to recognizing the other and finding a way to resolve the government shutdown. So I know everyone is very fascinated about this sort of very personal drama or mini drama between the Speaker of the House and the President over the State of the Union. I think what happened last night is much more important in the larger story of where this shutdown process is going. Because by recognizing the institutional clout of the House last night and saying so publicly, and as Nancy said, in a conciliatory way, it just leads me to believe that this White House is preparing itself possibly for other conciliatory maneuvers to come.
And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, Major, with you. I'm going to sound, this is going to be sort of awkward, but sort of seeing the silver lining in some movements. And part of that has to do with the two bills that are going to be reviewed today in the Senate. Nancy, you know, the expectation is both of them are going to fail. Yesterday, when I was talking to Major about this, he kind of said, well, that's actually a good sign because at least they're talking. I'm paraphrasing you, Major. Nancy, I'm going to get your take on this. Is this productive, even though we know most likely both of these bills are going to fail?
Sure. I mean, votes are better than no votes, right? It's probably cold comfort for a lot of federal workers knowing that these bills are going to fail, but at least Congress is coming back and they're actually going to try to do something. Now, even though these bills are going to fail today, that doesn't mean that they have no utility. What you've got are two bills, a Republican bill and a Democratic bill. The Republican bill is basically a reflection of what the latest White House proposal is, which is to give the president the $5.7 billion in border wall funding he wants, but as what they see as a concession to Democrats, allow temporary legal protections for the DACA population, people who came to this country illegally as children, some of them at least, for 3 years. That bill is going to fail because Democrats say, 3 years is not enough. It still leaves all these young people in limbo. And B, that it really isn't much of a departure from the president's opening salvo, and they don't want to give any wall funding, let alone $5.7 billion. So that bill is not going to get the votes it needs. Then you've got a Democratic bill that doesn't give the president any wall funding, but does reopen the government for a couple of weeks to allow more time for negotiations and at least allows these federal workers who are set to miss a second paycheck tomorrow to get paid in the meantime. That bill is going to fail because it probably won't get much Republican support. The one good thing that will come out of this, Anne-Marie, since you're looking for silver linings, is the fact that it will send a message to the president that what he wants right now does not have the votes to pass. And so he does perhaps need to move more towards the Democratic position. It obviously also sends a message to Democrats that they're not going to get exactly what they want. And they appear to already have gotten that message because there is talk in the House of another proposal, a Democratic proposal, that would give the president billions of dollars in border wall security funding, but not for, I should have said border security funding, not for a wall. That's the one thing that would not be in it. They'd give money for things like drones and personnel to beef up security at the border. And the question is, if they put that on the table, would the president, and Major certainly knows more about this than I do, would the president come off of his longstanding position that it's either the wall or nothing?
Would the president, Major? I know you can't get into his head, but he seemed at times to be willing to pivot towards border security versus just the wall.
Right. So, to pick up on Nancy's excellent description and reporting on what was happening yesterday, James Clyburn, number 3 House Democrat from South Carolina, said $5.7 billion border security. He said, I like to call it for a smart wall. Okay, a smart wall. That's a rhetorical way of trying to catch the president's ear. And I've been in communication via text this morning with senior administration officials who have not ruled that out categorically. They haven't embraced it, but they haven't ruled it out categorically. Long time ago, remember when the Oval Office, when Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer were there with the president, when the president said, I'm going to own the shutdown, I'll take the mantle? When I was standing there, I said to the president, is this going to come down to redefining what border security means? Meaning finding some mutually agreeable set of words that wrap around funding where everyone can say they're for something and define it later. Chuck Schumer, sitting right next to me in the Oval Office, said, yes, that's where this is going to land. And the president sort of didn't engage on that. It feels to me as if we're moving in that direction. Money is on the table. People agree about the money. There are limits on what it can be and can't be, but you can call it whatever you want to call it. Smart wall, 21st century wall, border security wall. Will it meet the president's definition? I don't know. But it hasn't been ruled out this morning here at the White House, which tells me there is at least some way after these votes that conversations can continue and move at least in a semi-productive direction.
You would think that would be sort of the first stop on getting to some sort of agreement, is defining exactly what you want the American public to pay for. Clearly, a smart wall might have a different price tag than a concrete wall or slats or whatever. But I digress, Major. I want to ask you about another major story. You know, Major, I'm sitting at this desk for hours on end, and I think that I've basically been here for most of the day's news. And then I leave, and 5 minutes later, all kinds of things happen. And in this
Welcome
case,
to my life. Yes.
Oh my goodness. So in this case, the president's former attorney, Michael Cohen, announced that he was now going to be postponing his testimony in front of Congress. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of people were really waiting to hear his version of the story. Found it interesting that he used the word postponing, but he's blaming threats by the president and the president's current attorney, Rudy Giuliani, for that decision. Here's what his attorney, Lanny Davis, had to say about the issue a little bit earlier this morning. Let's all listen.
The House of Representatives now has an obligation. A resolution of censure when the President of the United States indisputably intimidates and obstructs justice to prevent a witness from testifying is in order. So is a federal criminal investigation of Rudy Giuliani for witness tampering, calling out a man's father-in-law and wife in order to intimidate the witness is not fair game.
Okay, so let's remind people of what he's actually talking about, because he's talking about interviews that the president and Rudy Giuliani have done over the past couple of weeks, where suddenly Michael Cohen's father-in-law is the topic of conversation.
Right. Inferences made, implications laid out there that there might be something sketchy about his personal finances or something else, and that you should be looking into the father-in-law, and also vague references to possible culpability, very vague. We don't know what it means about Michael Cohen's wife. And top Democrats on the relevant committees yesterday in writing called this classic mob tactics, witness intimidation. That's a very big deal. I have no clue. I defer to Nancy entirely on this as to whether or not the House of Representatives would even consider a formal censuring motion of the president on this matter. But to have the top Democrats, the Oversight and Judiciary Committee, say on the record in writing the president has engaged, and one of his attorneys, Rudy Giuliani, has engaged in mob-like intimidation tactics is very serious stuff. And it is, again, a reflection of the institutional powers a Democratic House majority now possess, which this White House is over time having to get itself used to, sometimes in very uncomfortable ways.
Yeah, Nancy, I can hear you agreeing.
Right. I mean, the fact that Democrats now control the House means that, guess what? They can open an investigation today, if they want, into this allegation of presidential witness tampering, intimidation. And that itself can be another thorn in the president's side. So this is certainly not something that Democrats are going to let go. Of course, they do want to hear from Michael Cohen. They're not going to forget about him. And they will continue to try to push to make that testimony happen. But now they've got another avenue to explore, just as they set out on a whole raft of investigations into security clearances at the White House and the process used to come up with census questions and hurricane relief in Puerto Rico will now add another possibility to the plate. Did the president and one of his top attorneys intimidate a key witness? Certainly that's fertile ground for this new Democratic majority.
Yeah, right. Hey, Major and Nancy, before I let you go, Major, I talked about the word postpone. I don't know if I'm making too much out of it, if it's significant that he said postpone versus I'm not going to do it. We know he can't postpone it for very long because he's going to jail.
Well, right, and he also could be subpoenaed, and there are lots of means by which this could happen, and he clearly wants to say something. There is a timeline involved. Subpoena powers are relevant to an investigation like this. If he doesn't want to be a cooperative witness, he can be subpoenaed. The subpoena powers of Congress are important, hard to ignore. So this is, I think, properly described as postponed. And the other thing it illustrates is, for the first 2 years of the Trump administration, lots of wild things were said by the president on Twitter. That's not a breaking news item. But the House Republican majority in the House and the Senate Republican majority did not oftentimes react, or react in a strenuous way. The House Democratic majority is making it abundantly clear there is no such thing as simply loose talk on Twitter or in interviews by this president. Words matter, and it's going to use its powers if it believes those words are used in a threatening or injurious way, and make the White House explain itself in ways the previous House Republican majority almost never did.
Indeed. Nancy and Major, thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome, Anne Marie.